The preservation of and increased access to the 92nd Street Y Humanities Audio Archives is generously funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities.
Welcome to the three-part series on the changing American family. I'm Susan Schlechter, a board member from the 92nd Street Y, here to introduce tonight's speaker, Betty Friedan. Before I went to college in the fall of 1963, I, along with the rest of the entering class, all women, was asked to read The Feminine Mystique by Betty Friedan, a book which has now become a basic text from which the founding of the women's movement can trace its origins. The Feminine Mystique chronicles the difficulties of women who did not fit the stereotype of femininity, or, as Betty Friedan puts it, the problem that has no name. Betty Friedan helped to give the problem a name and a legitimacy. As a founder and then first president of the National Organization for Women, she has worked tirelessly for women's rights. As a writer, a teacher, a political activist, Betty Friedan provides an inspiring role model for women and for men. An entire generation of young women and young men has been growing up since Betty Friedan published her book. She comes to speak to us tonight on the topic, Transcending the War Between the Sexes, a logical consequence of the women's movement. It is an honor for me to introduce Betty Friedan.
Well, I have to tell you that I'm fit to be tied, because this is the first time I've lectured here, and I happen to think that what is happening to women and what is happening to the family is of enormous importance to the Jewish people. And I was very glad to hear that the Y is having this series on the changing American family, and that they asked me to be a part of it. And I'm very upset to hear that they have scheduled me opposite Elie Wiesel, whom I would much rather hear. You know, and and I sort of feel that is, shall we say, an unconscious, if not conscious, evidence of some attitude about women that needs to be transcended in the organized Jewish community if the family is going to survive, And I'm going to be a lot more blunt than I would have been because of this, All right. You who are here, and know that I have had something to do with the women's movement for equality. And in the last year or so, I have been talking a lot about the family. And that surprised people at first. Like, isn't the women's movement supposed to be against the family? Wasn't feminism supposed to be liberating women from the family? And so on and so forth. Now, I happen to think that the women's movement for equality was absolutely necessary, that we had to do what we did, not because I or anyone else, as I've often said, somehow bewitched the otherwise happy housewives who would be having orgasms waxing the kitchen floor. We hadn't come along. That there were evolutionary reasons that forced women to confront their identity as people in this society, to move beyond the traditional identity of women. Freud said anatomy is destiny. Embedded in Judeo-Christian tradition is the image of woman solely defined by her function as childbearer, as breeder of the race. And this, and for those of you who are here, and I suppose a lot of you are Jewish, as I am, you know how deep that is for us, that sense of the identity of woman. And yet, why did the women's movement have to happen as it did, exploding in the United States in the 60s in America? Because it was not possible for women to live any longer in an identity defined in those terms. You see, the major reason is the new years of human life. Our life expectancy, mine, standing here, is 80 years of human life. In an 80-year lifespan, there is absolutely no way that child rearing, no matter how joyously and responsibly espoused, and parenthetically, in getting ahead of the story, it will only be joyously and responsibly chosen if the equality for women is guaranteed from here on down. But no matter if chosen and how eagerly chosen, it can only define a woman, use up her energies, give her function, status, support, identity in society for a very few months, hours, years of her life on this earth. It cannot give her function in society lifelong. It cannot define her identity lifelong. That is the primary fact that forced women to confront their own personhood in society, not necessarily instead of wife and mother and housewife, serve the physical needs of husband, children, home. The feminine mystique, which descended on us from all corners after World War II, just as we had to face this new juncture, which was a massive crisis in identity for women, and sort of a last gasp of attempt to define ourselves in those terms. Those years made it impossible. Those years, the fact also that childbearing is a choice, not a necessity in the same terms as it used to be. That technologically we have the means to birth control, but that's only a part of it. That the children that are born will live. No, that women do not die in childbearing. Women have the years beyond childbearing. The children that are born will survive, will live. They are not needed as the social security for their parents, or won't be as they once were. And further, the evolution of the work of society, the evolution of society in general, so that we have a sense now, at least in advanced technological society, a sense of the quality of life and the value of the individual, and not the quantity of life. And the planet is getting too crowded, and not so many bodies are needed, to do the work, let's hope, to fight the wars. That is somehow a sense that it is possible to begin to really do what is also embedded in our Judeo-Christian tradition, to the value of each, the unique value of each individual life, including women's. Finally, there is the evolution of work. It no longer depends on the brute muscular strength that used to be done, where women maybe couldn't be equal to men. The work of society increasingly depends on qualities of mind, of intelligence, where boy children, girl children are potentially, they are equal, equally various, and on qualities of human sensitivity, where women, at least by their experience in life, have excelled. And the evolution of work outside of the simplicities of the family-sized farm, of the mama and papa shop, where even the work that women used to do in the home, and which gave her a self-respecting share of the work of society, now being done outside the home, in the cities, in the professions, and women have to be a part of that if they are to have economic and social function and identity lifelong. Okay, that is why the women's movement happened, and you all know, because your lives have been changed, you probably wouldn't be here to listen to me if they hadn't been, that the women's movement for equality has been the basic social movement, the movement of social change, the most far-reaching, probably, I think, the most important one of modern time. Many people are beginning to think that it is the most far-reaching revolution of all time, but it isn't what anyone else has ever meant by revolution before. We are just beginning to see really what it's all about. It has certainly changed lives and changed attitudes. A deeper section of society, broader section of society, more rapidly than any other movement of social change. All right. In the first stage of that movement, we have to distinguish between the image of woman's lib and the reality of women's movement for equality, or its mainstream. The essence of the women's movement, and it was only the first stage, and the second stage really does have to do with the family, and the second stage has to do with men. But the first stage had to do with women, had to women themselves had to move to define themselves as persons, the personhood of woman. And therefore women finally breaking through the feminine mystique and saying they are not just husband, wife, children, mother, breeder, server of physical needs, husband, children, home. I am a person. I am a person. Nora leaving the doll's house, her husband, the original male chauvinist pig who treated her like a plaything and a doll, and he said, how can you do this? You are above all else a wife and mother. Your first duty is to your husband and your children. And she said, no, I am above all else a human being just as you are. And until I find out who I am as a person, as a human being, I can't be a good wife and mother anymore. Now, the millions of American women didn't literally leave the doll's house, but some did. But we all had to. Here, I am a person just as you are. That's what it was about. I am a person just as you are. And then, because I am a person, I am entitled to the equality of opportunity and the voice in my own destiny and the human freedom and the individual dignity and the right to grow to my full potential that is my human and American birthright. Not an accident that the women's movement, modern women's movement, exploded in America first. Okay. As we moved, and the focus of the first part of the women's movement was on this personhood and then was on breaking through the barriers of sex discrimination that kept women from moving equally in society as persons. We won the laws, we got them enforced that said it was not legal anymore for the boss to say, I won't give this job to a woman. For the best colleges and universities or law schools not to take women, or to have sort of invisible quotas where women had to do twice as good as the men to get in. All the forms of sex discrimination that existed around us and that we weren't supposed to notice. And the situation of women sort of, when she was living in this other definition of her identity, was one of isolation and guilt. Always everything was woman's own fault, she was supposed to live in terms of the husband, the children, the marriage, so anything wrong with the husband, the children, the marriage, her fault. Can this marriage be saved? That's, the woman, adjust. The woman, villain in all the case histories. And if she was always passed over for promotion in the office, if she was running the office as a secretary but had no hope to ever, move into the executive line, if she had to stand up as a nurse when the doctor came into the hospital, and yet she kept the patient alive, and she taught maybe 3 generations of surgical residents how to do it. But she couldn't have a hope of a tenth of his pay, his status, his voice in the matters of the hospital lifelong. It was her fault, she wasn't supposed to notice it even. Wasn't supposed to notice it. If she was insulted by the prayer, by the language of the theology, while she cooked the church supper, or did the Hadassah work, and all that, you're not supposed to notice. Good Jewish woman. Are you supposed to notice that you are insulted by our theology, our prayers, by our tradition, as we are, as Jewish women, as Catholic women are, as Muslim women are, but we won't go into that at this moment. But, we would play a game about which is worse, but nevertheless, let's clean up our own house first. All right. Now, that we weren't supposed to notice it. It was, it's like our sin. Our sin. We're unclean, right? Anyway, what had been basic in tradition is in our religious tradition, then it became also a mystique glorified somehow by Freud, the import of Freudian psychology to this country, functional sociology, and then coming at us all sides from the mass media. Women were isolated. You know that when the Feminine Mystique came out in 1963, I later learned there were millions of women, each one thinking that she was alone. And she was a freak. If she wanted something more than somehow peanut butter sandwiches with the children, you know. I mean, is this all? You know, I mean, like, if she somehow had a nagging feeling, a malaise that I call the problem that has no name, because even if she, you know, loved this man that she, you know, was supposed to live for, that she loved those kids, you know, that was supposed to be all of life for her. And she did their homework, and she took them to the Little League, and she took them to the dancing lesson, and she, you know, picked up the pajamas, and she buttered the sandwiches, and she did all the things that she was supposed to do, and she learned how to make snails or something like that, you know. And even if she did that all, and that's all she was supposed to want, and the house got better and better, and even if she had the station wagon in the second car, you know, I mean, like, she had this feeling, is this all? Is this all? You know, and what? Problem that has no name, because if you had the husband, you had the house, you had the children, that was all. That was, you know, you weren't supposed to be a person, you know, that had, you know, abilities, energies that you needed to use in your society yourself. And there were millions of women, and each one thought she was a freak, she was alone. If she wasn't actually isolated in the suburban house, you know, or in the city apartment, you know, where between the hours of, say, 9 and 5, that nothing stirred, you know, over 3 feet tall, you know, and they were out, you know, whenever possible. If she wasn't isolated that way, even if she worked outside the home, as most, you know, more and more women were beginning to do, well, she was supposed to feel guilty for even doing it, no matter how much the pay was needed. Guilty. She was losing her femininity, destroying husband's masculinity, and neglecting the children in the Spockian era when they were supposed to need the 24-hour attention of the mother. So then guilt, 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 and then rush home to do all the housework. Because in those days, I'm talking about ancient history now, right? 15, 20 years ago. Those days, you know, it was bad enough that you worked in the first place. Heaven forbid that you would ask the children to take the bus or the, you know, or the husband to help, you know, share. I mean, they wouldn't have used that word. So we wouldn't have used that word then. I mean, so we were so guilty, and then we were so tired that I suppose we didn't have the energy, much less the consciousness, to know that, to feel that it was unfair. Unfair. We were paid half what the man was. Unfair if we did the research and the man got the credit. You know, unfair if we did the sort of the zip codes and all that for every election, without which the election wouldn't be won, and yet we're never expected to share in the voice, you know, in the political decisions. And I mean, the idea that women would preach a sermon that, you know, would have a voice in you know, theology itself, I mean, that was, you know, nobody would have considered that. Nobody would have considered that. Everything was our fault, guilt, guilt, guilt. And then, you know, if we got angry, fussed, you know, when these darling children that we were supposed to live for, and somehow, you know, they went behind when we were wheeling the supermarket cart, and we'd feel like shaking the little dears, you know, I mean, or if he would come home from his expense account, you know, lunch and his day at the office, it might not have been so glamorous, but at least it was action with people over 3 feet tall. You know, it was somehow, you know, out there, and it was rewarded by society, you know. And there was this feeling that even though all that the women's magazines and the ads hailed the housewife, the pedestal, and the great thing of the Jewish women, you know, the family and so on, there was this nagging feeling underneath that you know, there wasn't all that much value put on it. And that message somehow, you know, it got to us. It got to us one way or another. So then, all right, so supposing we unreasonably felt angry when just unreasonable angry even, he comes home, 6 o'clock. Something's wrong with us. All right, ancient history, remember? Okay. Suddenly, we learned that we were dealing with a general social, economic, political condition that we shared with other women. We were not alone. And we could call ourselves person, affirm ourselves as women, affirm other women, and we joined together to make a movement, and we demanded the equality that was our human and American birthright. And we are not finished by any means with that first stage. We certainly have made breakthroughs. It is not legal anymore for the boss to say, I won't give this job to a woman. And the girls are now not 3% in the law school, but 30% and 40% in the medical school. And our daughters, my daughter, I don't know if she's going to marry a doctor, but she's going to be a doctor. She just finished her 3rd year in medical school. And, you know, and if our daughters are bright, we expect them to use it as the way we do our sons, and they expect to. And all sorts of laws and courts' decisions have been won. It is not even legal anymore for the school system in any suburb city that we live in to use all the school athletic funds for physical, varsity sports for the boys, and a couple of $100 for a calisthenics class, a dull little calisthenics or dance class for the girls. You know, now for the girls as well as the boys, it is important to have the skills of body as well as mind, and a sense that they can take care of themselves. All these things have been very important, and we are only, I mean, we're in every discipline, in history, and in psychology, and mental health, and in literature, in art, we are uncovering the buried images of women, and we are uncovering the buried history, and the double standards, and the personhood of women, all disciplines, all language is getting richer as we bring out to full focus the personhood of woman as well as man. Now, there was a kind of a distortion that happened in the first stage of the women's movement, that we who started it, we started it from our own experience as women, and then if there was an ideology, and there was, but it didn't seem like there was, it was the ideology of American democracy, you know, as applied to women. Though it was unique to say that these values of equality, of human dignity, human freedom, that, well, everybody gives lip service to, and they have been the values of every revolution, but they are being applied for the first time not in the abstract, to somebody else or to some 10% minority, but applied to a 51 or 52% majority, and applied with the uniqueness and the concreteness that comes from woman's experience. You know, the dailiness of life as it is lived, you know, not an abstract, but the dailiness of life as it is lived in the home, in the kitchen, in the bedroom, in the living room, and in the office, in the school, in the classroom. There was no escaping it. You see, it changed our lives immediately, and it affected, therefore, the lives of husbands and children. All right. As the generation of the baby boom, the post-war baby boom, the ones that cut their political eye teeth on the ideology of class warfare applied to the problems of race in the 60s, as they began to have their consciousness affected by feminist thinking, and then saw that they were being treated like chicks on the mimeograph machine by the young radical boys in the radical student movement, who were every bit as much, you know, male chauvinist pigs as their fathers. And these girls got mad, and they had their resolutions on women's liberation, and they were laughed at by the boys, and they walked out and started their separate women's lib groups. And then, in their anger, and they had a right to be angry, they applied, because they didn't have much experience yet of life as women, they applied too literally the doctrines of class warfare, or of racial, you know, of the liberation from racial oppression that had been used on blacks, to their situation of women vis-a-vis men. Now, there was this, what I call sexual politics, which gave rise, as the media, of course, always comes in and exaggerates extremism, it gave rise to the image of woman's lib, you know, that as a bra-burning image. Nobody burned a bra, but never mind. There was some of this extreme sexual politics that said, somehow, woman against man. The women's movement was a movement of woman as a class oppressed, rising up against man as a class the oppressor, and therefore down with men, down with marriage, down with childbearing, down with anything having to do with men, down with anything women had ever done to attract men, you know, in the extreme. You know, that was seemed to be the message. And there was so much anger coming out that it felt right for a while. You see, women, let's face it, women the largest group of people in this society that, have been dependent. And when they're, and dependent people, they can't, so easily be overtly angry at what the conditions that really are oppressing them. So women have always taken out their anger on themselves, on their own bodies, in self-hatred, in self-denigration, in headaches. Pill sellers get rich not curing, and uncovertly on husbands and children. And now this anger is out in the open. And it, can be channeled. And so it felt right, maybe, to say man is the enemy, man is a class, or the man you're married to, or the, man you're working with, or just, man, whatever. Even, if you kept on living with him, or, going, but never mind, it felt good to get that anger out, and it was, real anger. Actually, the doctrines of sexual politics were wrong. I mean, they were distorted. They were not only wrong strategically, and politically, they're really wrong because they denied or defied, if you will, the fundamental human, sexual, social, biological, even economic, if you will, the interconnection, the interdependence of woman and man. And, I used to, it was such a relief to us, it was so strengthening for us to discover the solidarity of sisterhood, that we were able, together, that we could change things, our situation, that we could never do alone, that everybody hesitated to question even things as loudly as you should, that you thought were wrong in those early years of the women's movement. I never did like the sexual politics, and I used to try to sort of half joke, and I said, well, let's face it, I'd say, men are here to stay. I think men are here to stay, so we have to, live with them, work with them. What field haven't they already preempted? We have our own need to love and be loved. For most of us, that's men. If we're married to a male chauvinist pig, maybe we can change him. It's amazing how many change, And if we can't change, well, then maybe we have to walk out, although, maybe we can't afford to walk out or whatever. So maybe we adjust and it'll be better for our daughters. But this can't be a one-sex revolution. Man is involved here, and not as the enemy. There's something more to the relationship between woman and man than class enemy. It isn't the same as worker and boss. It isn't the same as black and white. And if, in fact, the sexual politics note, the extremist note, had prevailed, you would not have seen lives changed, as all our lives have been changed for the better by the women's movement. It wouldn't have been the mass movement, the mainstream movement it became. Because, in fact, the great majority of women in this country are married, do have children, and the young ones coming up have those needs, whether it's celebrated by church or state or not. They still have needs, love, be loved, and it is a fundamental part of woman's human condition that she is the person that gives birth to children. And it would have been politically all wrong and it was politically wrong, to the degree that the extremist note did preempt the airwaves too much at a certain point in this first stage of the women's movement. However, the actuality of the movement to the personhood of women and the actuality of the actions, the steps that were taken, the health affirmative, life-opening steps that women took individually as they took themselves more seriously, went back to school, did different things to school, were forced by economic circumstances as well as new ambition to, get jobs, but maybe seek better jobs than they might otherwise sought, or even if they faced still a lot of problems, were able somehow to see what those problems were and no longer just think everything is your own, fault, and this sense of that it's better, that there is a dignity, that there's a value of being a woman, and the sense of dignity and support we got for other women. All these were good things, and the more we moved and the more we changed the conditions that really did oppress us, the less angry we felt. All right. At this point, we are at the crest of what I think is the first stage that began with the women's movement was the first stage. What the next stage is more than the women's movement. We have to begin thinking in terms of the next stage, and we can't see the next stage in terms of woman against man, or even in terms of woman herself. The next stage involves man as much as woman. And the next stage, while we had to, in this first stage, focus on things like employment, focus on the need of women to move in society as a person in her own right, and the barriers that kept her from so moving. And then now we have to look again at the family that is still, we are born in families, and we all have needs that are only met in families. The next stage is one where we transcend what seemed to be that battle between the sexes, which more than we realize, the women's movement was almost like, you might say, the last part of that battle and the beginning of the end of it. The pathological hostility that was buried in many cases was caused by those unequal, polarized sex roles. What people like me are beginning to see, that the women's movement was all about, was that it was just the first stage of a very profound sex role revolution, not of woman against man, but of woman and man breaking through the masculine mystique as well as the feminine mystique, those unequal, polarized sex roles that kept both of us from being all we could be, locked us both in too many instances in mutual torment in the family, led to all sorts of covert hostilities that families have lived with, for generations, as well as the overt hostilities of recent years, and around which our institutions are still built. Now, in order to live the equality, which is something that women in this country now do assume. I'm not saying we've won it, because an enemy has emerged, not man as such. A majority of men, for instance, support the Equal Rights Amendment, as do a majority of women. But an enemy has emerged, a reactionary political enemy, a reactionary enemy of reactionary political forces, reactionary economic forces, reactionary fundamentalist church hierarchies, who are very threatened by the movement of women to equality and would beat us back. And furthermore, would use these issues of great change that have taken place, that have affected all families, to create a new hate hysteria. And I want to parenthetically tell you just a few words about that, because I think that you should be aware of how really serious this the political battle that, I don't feel it's right for me to talk about the second stage. And I know that in a certain sense, without making it very clear that the first stage is in danger. Do you realize that if Ronald Reagan wins the election, that all that women have won toward equality in the last 15 years will probably be lost, that will be taken away? The fact that the Republican Party voted to repudiate nearly 50 years of endorsement of the Equal Rights Amendment, the constitutional underpinning of the laws of equal opportunity that we need, the principle that getting women finally in the Constitution that we need if we are to have a hope of the real protection for women in Social Security, or real protection for women who have been housewives when it comes to divorce, and much less that the continued enforcement of the laws that give women an equal opportunity in jobs and education. When they repudiated that, and then when they voted, that not only would they look for a constitutional amendment to make it a crime for a woman to have to exercise choice in the matter of whether and when to bear a child, but to appoint only judges that would be prejudiced in advance against women's right to choose. which make that right to choose, is what makes it possible for women to affirmatively choose to have children and joyously and responsibly choose to have children, especially in economic time when it costs so much and when 2 paychecks are needed and all the rest of it. So they say there are 4 Supreme Court justices are going to be appointed in the next 4 years. Now, it is not a minor matter. I'm not going to go into anything else about the Reagan and Republicans at the moment because it isn't, germane to what I'm talking about tonight. But that is not a minor matter, that all the gains of women would be taken away. Because I want you to know that there is something, that kind of a semi-fascism. There's the most incredible propaganda, this moral majority, this immoral majority, that is using a false flag of the family. A false flag of the family to try to prevent the measures that really are strengthening American families, such as the right to have safe legal medical access to birth control and abortion instead of being at the mercy of butchers and coat hangers and the like, such as the right of women to earn decently. And then when most parents are working today from economic necessity with inflation, if you have young parents, if there are those in your family, they have no choice, a lot of them anyway. They have no choice. I'd like women to have the choice to have children. The choice to have children means not only the access to birth control and abortion, but it means maternity leave, paternity leave, child care aids, all these things that in the name of the family, the Reagans and the moral majority would absolutely rule out, as well as safe legal access to birth control and abortion. And I want you to know that these are the same forces that burnt crosses on lawns in the South and painted swastikas in synagogues. And I don't know how much you know that in the states where the Equal Rights Amendment has not been ratified, those forces, the moral majority, those groups that support Ronald Reagan, are using the most vicious anti-Semitic propaganda against the Equal Rights Amendment. I mean, and they are using leaflets like these in the Illinois state legislature. 2 nights before the ERA came up for a vote last spring, every member of the legislature got the most pernicious document in the mail, which claimed that Equal Rights Amendment was a Jewish and Zionist plot to destroy the Christian family. Well, all right, it's funny, right? But it's not funny. It's not funny. I mean, I think that, there is a dangerous way that they are trying to make a package of women issues, sexual issues, the values that we have for the family, and, where all this is, where change is threatening everybody in a way. And then create the same kind of hate movements that reactionary forces have always had in this country. We are not safe. We are not safe, really, to move on to the next stage, which is to make equality livable and workable and possible for us to meet our needs to love and be loved and strengthen new evolved forms of the family, and really exercise our choice to have children until we can get that Equal Rights Amendment behind us and be sure of the rights that we've already won and not be forced back fighting to protect what we've won. So, I mean, it's very important. The election, November 4th, it's very important that we get the Equal Rights Amendment behind us. All right, let's talk about the reality of the family today. And the reality of the family as it is irreversibly changed by the changed role of women. And I want to talk very plainly about this in audience of the YMHA. I don't want to be paranoid and think that there was a plot somehow, to get everybody over there with L.A. Wiesel, so we don't have many people hearing someone as radical as me talk about, the changing Jewish family and the necessity to affirm the new role of women in a strengthened Jewish family. But I think it is threatening. It is threatening in some ways to the... I know that when I have had these discussions, and I am proudly a Jew, but there are a lot of conflicts with a woman who wants to affirm Jewish identity with the attitude of the Jewish community toward women, and certain aspects of woman's identity that are built into Jewish tradition that have to be changed, that have to evolve. And if you're serious about being a Jew, you better take those things on. Now, I happen to be serious about being a Jew, about being American, about being a woman, and also about the family. And for all those reasons, I say, you're going to have to face certain things. Everybody's, as important as the families are to Americans generally, the family is even more important to Jewish Americans. And I don't have to explain the reasons for that. So I've heard people say, well, how are we going to get the Jewish woman to return to her traditional role in the family? Or, blame somehow something. How are we going to get Jewish women to have 5 children or 4 children and 3 children again? And it's all you nasty feminists, that have given them these selfish, other ambitions, and so on and so forth. So I say to people who say that, listen, I've got news for you. There is no way that you're going to return the Jewish woman to a broodmare status. There is no edict. There is no way that it's going to happen. And if you want the intelligent, energetic Jewish daughters of today to be able to choose to have 1, 2, 3, or whatever children, then you had better be very serious indeed about helping to put that constitutional underpinning on equal opportunity, and then move on to the new supports the family needs when both parents are likely to have to work, or likely to be have the luck to be, if they have the luck to be, in possibly rewarding professions that up till now have been structured only in terms of the lives of men who have had wives to take care of the details of life, do you see? And so you have women today who are, for all kinds of necessities, economic, because have you read the papers lately, if you don't know it from your own life, that say it takes 2 incomes to buy a house? How can young people buy a house today? You know what apartments are like in New York? And now you have to buy the apartment even, So it takes 2 incomes, so her paycheck is needed. How is she going to have a child? This is the only advanced nation, that doesn't have a national policy of maternity leave and paternity leave. So even if she's sure that her job will be kept for her, if she takes time off to have a child, even if her husband is willing to share the parenting, and we are now saying that they should not just help. Who needs that kind of help? Then mops the floor, it gets streaked. He forgets to put the potatoes in. He is making the barbecue sauce with an apron while she cleans the toilet bowl. That help we don't need. Right, all right. So share. Sign it in blood, share. Even if he's willing to share, the hours are structured such a way, if he's a lawyer, if she's a lawyer, to be a partner, you have to work nights, weekends, so on and so forth. All the ways the hours are structured. How can she... So even if she does, all right, I'll take the time off, have a baby, we'll share, we'll take turns, we'll do whatever. Then who's going to help take care of the children, All of these practical problems. So if she still takes it all on her own shoulder, superwoman. That's the solution, superwoman. So she is still trying to meet the standards of success in the job, based on the patterns of those men that did have the wives of the secretaries to do all those other things, which now even secretaries aren't willing to do, and the patterns of success of the man in the rat race, who whole identity was based on winning that rat race, and he had to be the sole breadwinner. And then at the same time, she is trying to run the house, that give us incentives, whatever, that can be parent controlled, and that can be that we absolutely have to have in the condition today. There's a study that was done in Westchester by Sheila Kammerman, who is a professor of social policy and planning at Hunter and the Columbia School of Social Work, about what actually happens today with women whose children who are working and who have 1 or 2 children under 5. And she found that the worst problem was the lack of child care and the inflexibility of working hours. What often begins when the kid has to go to school, the same time as school begins. So this is what she found. She found that they'd have as many as 5 or 6 different arrangements to get them through the day. Like, the husband would take Jimmy to school on his way to work, and she would take the baby to the first family daycare, sitter. And then Jimmy would go home with Bobby and Bobby's mother for lunch. And then the second family daycare sitter would pick up the baby carriage, then go pick up the baby at the first sitter's house, then go pick up Jimmy at Bobby's house, and come home, and then there might even be a third. And if anyone in the whole chain got sick, then she'd get called to the office, And the whole thing was put together with chewing gum and Band-Aids, And it was a wonder that, the only thing you could say is that they didn't have the guilt that they used to have. But and the husbands were sharing it a lot. But the hours were structured so inflexibly, and there weren't the child care situation. And this was in a Westchester suburb. It wasn't in Mississippi either. All right. But one thing was interesting there. The family was strengthened. In that setup, where the mother and father both worked and shared the breadwinning, and they shared the parenting, the bonds were not only stronger between mother and father and the children, but between mother, father, children, and grandparents and other relatives who were needed. I mean, it was the strengthening of the family, And as I see, and I've been interviewing a lot of the young people lately that are having the courage to have families in the view of all the, the problems they have to face, and willing to try to, I think they've got to get out of that superwoman bind. But I see something that is emerging again, and it's like the mom and papa shop. It is a new version of the mom and papa shop. And there's a lot of interesting sharing that's being worked out there. And it's good for the kids, too, to have, I like seeing movies like Kramer versus Kramer, or The Great Santini, or even Ordinary People. Now, I don't like the image of the woman in some of those movies, because why do you have to make the woman the heavy? Why do you have to make the woman leave her nurturing, her tenderness, her children, in order for the man to be liberated to his? But at least it's good that we change the American hero from big, strong, muscle John Wayne, who can knock anyone down, to short, sensitive, nervous Dustin Hoffman, and then in Kramer versus Kramer, so she leaves, and he has to take care of this little child that he already noticed before, and he all thumbs trying to make the French toast and this and that and the other thing, and he learns how to do it. And then, the reviewers say, just doing those daily things, taking care of the child, that women have done year in, year out, generation in, generation out, without any brownie points, particularly roses on Mother's Day, so he just picking the baby off the jungle gin, wiping up the bloody nose, watching play, or talking it and putting to bed at night, making, pouring the Wheaties in the bowl, all that sort of thing. He becomes a man. But he does, you see. The reviewers, it was interesting, they said he was a hollow man. Eager Beaver, Rat Race, just working to win the rat race. And then these experiences, these simple elementary human experiences of taking care of the child, brought him in touch with certain feelings, certain basic human core of himself, made him a man. That's an interesting thing, and there's a lot of, there's a truth to it. And when you see The Great Santini, see that movie. It's a wonderful movie about the changing thing of man. All right, this lecture was supposed to be about transcending the war between the sexes. In order, you can get at it at any one of the routes, but in order to get the conditions that we need to make this new situation where from economic necessity women are going to have to share, the breadwinning and all that, to make it livable, workable, so on and so forth, possible for families to survive, we're going to need to restructure work, restructure jobs, restructure hours of work, get things like flex time, get things like child care. We're never going to get those in terms of women alone. We shouldn't even try. We're only going to get them if men and women want them equally. And the big news that's about to happen in the family and become much more conscious than it was before is the quiet movement of American men. The movement of women toward equality is making it possible to transcend that war between the sexes. And there was always implicit, and it's going to become explicit, in women's liberation from her feminine mystique, from her confining role. The other half of that was man's liberation from the iron mask, the false and obsolete definition of masculinity that has made our fathers and some of our husbands die 10 years younger than the women their age, from the heart attacks and the strokes, and that are the toll, at least in part, of that definition of masculinity that makes a man defeated almost before he begins, that defines him as a man, by having big muscles when there are no bears to kill, by beating the rat race that is rigged against him and beating it all alone and suppressing his tears and his fears and his feeling and living a narrow, truncated life. In the first part, we concentrated my movement, on women. The woman's movement was only the first stage. Now you are beginning to see a movement of men. Actually, it began a while back, but it wasn't seen in those terms. Those young men a decade ago that started wearing their hair long, and they, would say, no. And they said, I don't have to have big muscles when there are no bears to kill. I don't have to napalm all the children in Vietnam and Cambodia and the green leaves off the trees to be a man. I don't have to be superior and dominant to everybody in the world to be a man. I can be tender, sensitive, compassionate. I can admit I'm afraid. I can even cry. I'm a man. I'm my own man. The greening of America, remember? Now that was supposed to go away when, in the recent economic downturn or whatever you want to call it, and everybody got so careerist now the men want to go into the MBA programs and law school and this and that and the other thing, and they have to worry about earning the dollar. But there is something else happening with men. It's not changed that much. The polls recently, and there's some very interesting studies that have been done by Yankelovich and Lou Harris and others, show that for young men today, they don't want to live and die like their fathers did. They don't want to live for the dollar alone, and the dollar isn't worth that much anymore. And the jobs aren't that good. So Yankelovich says, self-fulfillment for young men today is defined not just success in a job, though they all know and they expect to, and I hope their expectations are going to be okay, that they expect to earn, enough money. But that isn't, self-fulfillment is either separate from that or has to be in addition to that. It has to do with personal growth. It has to do with even love, with family, much more than for men in the past. And that is a real change when it shows up in national polls. And polls not taken by feminist groups, I'll have you know. Taken by outfits like Playboy and Esquire, that weren't necessarily trying to make that point and discovered it to their surprise, But and if the man is able to say, yes, I've interviewed a lot of young men lately, and they say, all I've been hearing 10 years, 15 years is woman, 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 woman. Oh, what does it mean to be a woman? How does a woman fulfill herself? They even make the men talk about women. And what do I have but my job? And what about me? What about me? Now, if she is earning as well as he is a little freer, even in a time of big economic pinch, to say, what do I want? And, lots of things change. Lots of things change. They get married and they stay married for the right reasons, not the wrong reasons, What does it do to a man to be regarded only as a breadwinner? There was a study was done by a very good psychologist a few years ago on Long Island. And it was about how Long Island housewives looked at their husbands. This was before the women's movement, but, not that long ago. And they saw them, first of all, as breadwinners, second as fathers, third as husbands, and fourth as themselves. You know, I mean, now all sorts of interesting things are happening when the woman no longer has to depend completely on the man for status, identity, support in society. She says she wants something else from the man. She wants him to have feelings. She demands something different from the man. Well, it can make a man a little nervous, especially if the marriage started in the other way. It's just, what does she want? It's no longer enough that he just brings home the bacon. But that's also a relief, too. I mean, you don't see so many men jumping out of the window today as you did in 1929 either. And one of the reasons for that is the wives are working. You see men that are they talk about the midlife crisis, but you see a lot of men that are able to make some changes that are better for their own life and maybe life-affirming for their own life in midlife, because not only the wife may be sharing part of the economic burden, but also because the wife isn't only measuring anymore, keeping up with the Joneses in terms of that fur coat or that material thing, because she has other means. After all, what did a woman have once the children, were grown and so on and so forth, except these material things to give her a sense of self? Now she has other things, and she can call herself person on many different dimensions, and that is very strengthening to the relationship. As a man, there are transitions here. There are transitions. Like, say, all right, young people, we're going to share the housework. We're going to share the parenting. So then they say, remember when everybody was going to try to make contracts? Every 3 hours and 20 minutes you put in, every 3 hours and 20 minutes, he'll put in Monday, Thursday, Friday. He does this and she does that, Tuesday, Wednesday, Saturday, vice versa, and so on and so forth. Arguments, okay? So I talked to a lot of couples that, that had lived through those hostilities and weathered them, transcended them. It turned out to be something interesting. Now, I am not saying that our men are angels. After all, we are dealing with men that had mothers that picked up their pajamas and buttered their bread and all that. And so such a man may think he can't get along in life without a mother to take care of him the rest of his life. And he is all thumbs at first, see. And then it's so easy for a man to stay all thumbs and then do it so terribly that she says, oh, I'll do it, who needs it? But another interesting thing happens, though. I learned from some of these women who were trying to be the big superwoman and be, the house and the children working, and so on. And then they say, she realizes she cannot do it. She can't do it. And she realizes that it's a pain for her to give up the power of being the only one, the only important one in the family, with the home, with the children. There was power there. Now, those jokes about, think about it a minute. Think about the jokes about the Jewish mother. I hate jokes about Jewish mothers. I hate them. They make me acutely uncomfortable. Portnoy's complaint, or his mother's kisses, the Jewish mother, following the son to college, to the bathroom or whatever. I hate those jokes. I suppose because there's some uncomfortable grain of truth. But think about, we are the descendants of strong women. Think of the women that came, our grandmothers, great-grandmothers, to this country as immigrants, to a country where they didn't know the language, and sometimes they worked in the sweatshops, and they sent the kids to school, and they coped with the practicalities of a land where they didn't know the language, and they, supported, what husband had to deal with this strange land and defeat it, and make the children ambitious to be doctors, to be lawyers, and make them somehow, able to do that, and maybe she not only took care of the house and even maybe kept a kosher kitchen, but she also maybe worked in the sweatshop. And then think a generation or two later of all that energy. One comfortable house, apartment, and 2 children, and one husband off in an office all day. And what happens to that energy and to that strength? So what happened to it wasn't so great, because it made the Jewish mother, and you think it was unique to the Jewish mother? No. There was the Italian version, the Irish version, the Mexican version, But it was interesting. We have very talented writers among Jews. And so, the Jewish mother, I wish they would stop. All right. But maybe the phenomenon will stop. All right. So you start using this strength, but to give up, you see. I think the family is a very important thing. And I think that sometimes a woman would rather have the extra pressure of being superwoman than tamper too much with those, she knows in some very deep part of her there needs some, she doesn't want to weaken too much the cement that holds this family together. She also has to, the identity she's getting, let's face it, the jobs most women have today are pretty stinking jobs. There are a few at law school, and they're, getting there in the Wall Street law firms, and they're marvelous, and we read about them in the papers and so on and so forth. But the average wage of women today compared to men is 59 cents. And most women are still doing the same service type jobs that women have always done. They are doing them outside the home for too little money, just because it is still considered woman's work, and they're doing them inside the home for no money at all, and not even valued if she's been a housewife, equal to the man's if there's a divorce and the property is split up. Well, it's going to take a lot of very careful trial and error and a sense of what the trade-offs are to work out the sharing. It's happening. New studies show that women are spending less time on housework and men a little more. And the men are, these movies are very important that show a very positive image of the men sharing the parenting. And the men find a real goodie in that. Now, I do believe that, for instance, I think, for instance, that divorce is not going to continue to increase. I think that the explosion of divorce that we've seen in every advanced technological society, and it doesn't have very much to do with the women's movement. The only different thing the women's movement has done is that it has made it possible, in a few cases now, for women to walk out of impossible marriages where they had to stay before it. Because they didn't have the economic or psychic freedom to get out. Until very recently, only divorces in this country were sought by men, except for a few wealthy women, or under the most dire circumstances, because only men had the enough economic freedom to do it. On the other hand, a lot of the hostilities that can't be surmounted and that are breaking the marriage apart are the pathological remains of the hostilities that were built in those previous unequal polarized sex roles, where each of us could take it out on the other. And when the man reaches 45 and 50 and he realizes he's not going to be president of the General Motors or the ad agency, in fact, the man coming down from the younger man is going to take away his job, or he may have his nice office taken away and be put in a smaller one, with even lose his secretary. So a younger woman may assuage ego. Divorces are happening for a lot of reasons. Some instances the woman is saying, "No, I'm not going to put up with this any longer. I've had it." When masochism used to be the norm for women, and it isn't anymore. There's a lot of stuff that's happening. When the smoke clears, I don't think that we're going to see a continued increase in the divorce rate. I don't think either that we can assume that every marriage is going to last for life, because life is too long. But in the future, they're going to get married for the right reasons and stay married for the right reasons more. It is interesting that most divorces end in marriage. At the moment, because of certain things we don't need to go into there, but we all know about them, that works out better for the men than the women, after a divorce. On the other hand, marriage, it's interesting, marriage in this country worked out better for men than for women. A very interesting set of figures have come out on studies that were done in Midtown. It was done right here in this I think this neighborhood, right where we're standing, is a part of it. The Midtown Manhattan study, and then a comparable national study, the National Center for Health Statistics, massive study of every index of that related to the mental health of people. And the original study done 15, 20 years ago showed that every decade after the age of 20, that the mental health of women deteriorated increasingly, and very bad compared to men. That the impairment of the mental health of women in increasing decades after 20, and especially after 40, was so great compared to men that Jesse Bernard, who's a very famous sociologist, concluded that marriage was good for men but was driving women crazy. All right. Those studies were repeated in the last few years. An amazing thing that first they thought, well, what's happened? Mental health no longer deteriorates with age. What happened? It was assumed that mental health deteriorates. Then they looked again and they said, no, only with women. Something had happened in those 15 or 20 years that changed the situation dramatically for women, that women today in the Midtown Manhattan, or in a comparable sample nationally, were better off in their 40s and 50s than women had been in their 20s and 30s, 15, 20 years ago, and much better off than women in their 40s and 50s. No, there were in the original study that mental health did not deteriorate that way with age for women any longer. And the demographers, the public health epidemiologists that studied this, they concluded that it had to have something to do with the women's movement, because it did not happen with men. And they said it is better for women's mental health to have this new sense of equality, of self-respect, of some sense of option, of independence in your life, that it was better. And instead of life being over at 40 with the menopause, how many women that you hear or that you've seen who have when the empty nest and the menopause do not turn out to be the trauma they were always expected to be, because you are in life now as a person, not just a broodmare. So the life is not over, and women are moving with new zest into all sorts of things. But two things that are not so good are clear in that study: that no comparable improvement has happened with men. Something has got to happen next to the role of men that liberate men to some of feelings and fullness of life, to liberate them more than they have been liberated up till now from the narrow strictures of that masculine role, which has up till now been so largely defined in terms of breadwinning success, that is making the men die too young. Other thing that came out from this study is that the women in their 20s and 30s today are showing more signs of stress. More signs of stress than the men, more signs of stress than the women in their 20s and 30s 15 or 20 years ago. Now that is also understandable in terms of some of these changes. After all, when you were 20 or 30, some time back, all you were expected to do was all you thought you had to do was to find a man to take care of the rest of your life. Well, you might wake up, 10 or 15 years later and, say, well, you never said they never said, what do you want to be, little girl, when you grow up? It was just, what do you want to be, little boy, when you grow up? But, the boys like you, and you'll be a mommy like mommy, and you never had to think about it, just get the man. Then, 15 years later, it wasn't so easy to go back to school, to have to cope with a complex world out there, compete with people younger, and when you, had to master anything, just harder than that house and those kids for all those years. And, there might be trouble, but when she was 20, it wasn't so apparent. Today, the young woman has to deal with, what do I want to be? She has to deal with the same complex world the boy is. It's true that almost anything that a woman does today is an adventure compared to her brother. I mean, that it's still sort of, for a woman, it's great. I mean, in other words, it's interesting. There's something about the way women are moving today that somehow there's a zest there, that for the boys, these things are not so new, so great. But the woman also still has the question of, whether it's church or state, whether she says she wants to get married or whether she says she doesn't, there is still that aspect of life. And, in a mass society today, judging by the pattern of our young people, judging by the interviews one does with the young women and the young men, there is this loneliness, there is this need for intimacy. That's not changed. That's, as great as it ever was. Maybe the same needs are not the one. The woman is not absolutely dependent on our total identity any longer, for marriage or the total economic support. But other needs remain. Other needs for intimacy, for love, for family. It's not good for people to live alone. And even economic needs, because it is, easier too. And when women are locked in the reaction against the old trapped housewife image, they may not even recognize, their new needs. And then there is the agonizing conflict that young women are facing today on this very question of having children, which gets back to where I came in. I worry about that. I worry about that conflict. I don't think every woman has to have a child to fulfill herself, but aside from questions like how do we keep the human race going, or other questions like how do we keep the Jewish people going, aside from those questions, I think that it's very basic to woman's identity, the generativity, the profound impulse to have children for woman or man. But women are different than men, and it is not lightly denied. And there are too many women today, young women, in their 20s, in their 30s, who are postponing and agonizing over that choice because it isn't really a good choice. Because in the name of the family, reactionary forces have prevented the changes that we need for the new strengthened family. So those measures, they're not so wild, flex time, things that will improve productivity, they will decrease absenteeism, that they will fit with the energy problems in the society. But there will have to be a demand for them, for men and women, and we will have to beat back the reactionary forces. We will have to begin talking in new terms about families, about child care. I think we'll have to be thinking in new terms about the family in all the things we do. Think about one young woman that I interviewed. She wasn't so young anyway. She had spent some time, trying to be the housewife in her, without even noticing that her husband, was really the bills. He was in agony because his job wasn't that secure, and there were layoffs and this and that. And finally, she did go back to work, and there were the kids, and he was able to do, because part of his work he did at home, he could take over more and more of the kids, and they were working out all those things. And the last thing that changed, and when she finally realized that one of the things that was making for the problems was her unwillingness to give up the power, and she was able to give it up, and she saw there were trade-offs, and she began to work it out. The last thing that changed was the Seder. I mean, she used to have the Seder at her house, and she made the matzo balls from scratch, and she made the gefilte fish from scratch, and she had the in-laws and her parents and all the relatives, and everybody said, "Oh, Judy is such a wonderful cook, Judy is such a wonderful wife and mother," and she got such kudos, from doing this. I can't do it anymore, but I love having the Seder. So we now have a potluck Seder. And the mother-in-law brings the matzo balls, and the other grandmother brings the chicken, and the sister-in-law makes the gefilte fish. Only this year, the brother-in-law is making it because the sister-in-law had to go to work too. And Judy does all the fixings of the table and the horseradish and and all the religious symbols and everybody loves it. And it's the second year they've done it, and then there's a whole argument, who's going to bring what next year, and my spoon pudding is better than yours, and so on and so forth. But it works, very, very well. All right. The new family, the things that are needed to strengthen the family. I think I'm going to end with this sense that we are going to transcend the hostility between the sexes. The Bible's word for sexual love was the word to know. And they said he knew her. Now, they never said she knew him. But never mind. Now, think about it. If she couldn't ever be or know herself, if he couldn't really be or know himself, if he had to pretend to this big he-man, even if he felt terribly shivery inside and then never discover what his real strength was, if she had to smile sweetly even when she felt like kicking, they can't know themselves. How could they really know or love each other? It seems to me that every step we make that liberates woman and man to be who he is really, who she is really, and then let be with each other and know each other, really know. The more we liberate the possibilities of real love between the sexes. The sexual revolution was nothing, all those Kinsey measurements and so on and so forth, nothing. We are only going to be really seeing what the possibilities of true human intimacy, of true love, of a family knit together by love and dependence that is real again, and where there is this equality, this sharing, a flow of give and take. When we get on with the new problems and begin to create with a spirit of zest and adventure and trial and error and risk, the new patterns that are needed. Instead of holding on to the past, yes, we will hold on to the past. We will hold on to all that is good in our traditions. We will hold on. We cannot deny the basic roots of our identity as man, as woman, but we cannot deny the changing world either. That there's a sociology called it the classical family of Western nostalgia maybe never was as ideal as it was supposed to be. But surely it isn't going to be anymore. And yet there will be new joys and new patterns of give and take and strength and support and fun, for new families. Not only this little teeny nuclear family that we've been thinking of as the family in recent years of mama and papa and those children, but the extended family again of the grandparents and the relatives, or those who will be our family from choice, because we are not all going to have blood family living near us then more. And this is the venture of the family, the new family, man and woman ahead, is a very, very important thing. It also is a very important thing to understand that it is not just some periphery. It is not a periphery to give lip service to or roses on Mother's Day. There is serious political business here. There are serious barriers in the way for our own lives, for our own selves, for the future, for the principles of life and love that should take precedence over the forces, death and profit and dehumanizing that come from sources one way in communism and another way in the threats that are coming from the third world and another way in our own capitalist world. The family, a strengthened family, a family based on equality of women and men, and the strong personhood of women and men, and a really free and good and responsible choice to have children. This is going to be a bulwark for our humanness. I welcome you to this adventure. Talk too long, but we'll have some questions.
Mrs. Friedan, what do you call the right reasons for marrying for the right reasons?
Well, I don't think it's a right reason when you have to, when, like, women used to have to get married because there was no way to function in the society. Almost otherwise. You know, there was the Catholics, there was the nun. The Catholics there was a role for women, otherwise none. But when you call it love to yourself, but you marry for economic support, or you marry to the young girls used to go to college, and they were sent to college really not to get educated. They were sent to college to get a man as successful, potentially successful man as possible, and those are not necessarily the right reasons. You know, I mean, like, they don't necessarily guarantee the possibilities of real intimacy, you know, and real love. Maybe, I mean, listen, I just came back from Japan, and arranged marriages, which are in the Japanese tradition and used to be in our tradition, sometimes worked out very well. But I'm not so sure that having, you know, that when the woman's measure for the man that she was going to marry was the, you know, how much money he was going to likely earn, you know, and whether that was the right reason, you know. I would say that the right reasons are to marry someone you want to spend your life with, or you want to, you know, have kids with, and let's not be naive, I suppose. Economics does have some part of it. An interesting thing today is getting to be, I think that, you know, a woman who isn't able to earn is not going to be so desirable, because, in fact, it's economic necessity, you know, that there be two incomes. And so it's an interesting thing. You know, it used to be that the girls were told, don't hide it if you're smart in school, because the boys won't like you. I'm not so sure anymore, you know, that it's going to be quite that way. A lot of things are changing. But I mean, it's also not right if you have to stay married because you have absolutely there is nothing you can do otherwise. I mean, in other words, that the woman would have to put up with an absolutely terrible situation where she was, you know, treated very badly, where she was humiliated, you know, where there was no real intimacy or love or support, you know, because economically she couldn't move otherwise, or the status in society for a woman that got divorced was a pariah, you know, for both of those reasons. I think that as oldness, the economic necessities, incidentally, won't completely disappear. I don't think that either woman or man is going to want to have the responsibility of completely supporting someone else. You know, and it is much better that both, I mean, that be able to carry the burden, you know, and share the burden, but that it can be done with some give and take. But there's going to be a real sense of parasitism, you know, on the part of, I think, and it's almost conscious, you see, it's almost becoming conscious among the men. Now, you see some tendencies for role reversal here, and I don't think role reversal is good either. In other words, what didn't really work out one way isn't going to work out the other way. And so the man says, well, all right, let me stay home and let her take care of me for a while, or let her support me for a while. Well, you know, if I've supported her for 15 years or whatever like that, let me have my time. So, I mean, that seems just, But where women have done it the other way, where the man suddenly, in retreat from the demands of masculinity, wants to just take the woman's role and be the old woman's role and be completely supported by the woman. That doesn't work out. That doesn't work out. I mean, somehow equality works out better for the human relationship, for the sexual relationship, for all the things that count. I mean, yes, give and take, and the economic measure is not the only important one, but you can't completely discount it either. It's better, though. It gives both more freedom to do his or her thing if both are sharing the economic burden. And some interesting studies where show that there are two-income families where something like $20,000 a year or more, anyway, where they seem to spend the way they spend their money and the way they live is more geared to values of personal growth, human satisfactions, and health, self-fulfillment, and family pleasures than the strict material considerations. And it's interesting because you think, well, if both are going to be earning, then both, you're delivering both into the maws of the capitalist system, but in a sense, with both earning, both are strengthened, to be able to have other values and not be completely at the mercy for instance, of corporate things. So you see that the young men today are saying, no, I'm not going to take this transfer if it means uprooting the family. The family really wants to stay here. The wife has her job here, or the kids are in school here, even if it means losing the promotion, even in the economic situation of today. And the companies are having to, what's going on here? And then they're going to have to come to terms with that. So they said, is it really necessary to keep transferring those executives? I read an interesting book, The Manager's Study of this sort of thing, said all those policies that made it so difficult for company men to have real community activities or political activities or real family, to really do their family responsibilities. Those long hours and excessive traveling and transfers weren't necessary for the work of the company, but what they did do was make the man a company man, so he was dependent for his whole identity on the company. So it'll be better for the man if he doesn't have it. Someone, yes, right. The what? You have to talk louder. What? More anxiety created in role reversal or equal participation. No. You're dealing with a lot of stereotypes here. If it is true that the woman is still the person that bears the children, but from then on it really can be shared, and it is better to be shared. A lot of men felt very left out when babies were born, and and baby makes 3, and some, if you read it in case histories, if you know from psychology, sometimes the man didn't have such a good reaction to all that, and he felt very left out of that relationship. Then a father can be just as tender, just as caring as a mother, but not saying the women are the same as men, but I have interviewed a lot of young couples where it's very satisfactory that sharing the joys and the responsibilities of the parenting. And if I do think that and most parents think that too, that they want that in the child's first years they need the continuity, and it doesn't have to be just mother. It could be mother and father. It could even be mother and father and if not grandmother, someone substitute, but it should be a good, stable situation. Nursery schools, child care centers are not Sing, B.F. Skinner boxes where you dump the baby into an antiseptic box, sort of on the, hook with a diaper, and then you never see him again, and he's brought up by the state, A nursery school is something that in very wealthy suburbs, people would it's better for kids to have some hours of the day where they are with other children and where they have trained people giving them the stimulation and rather than in the mother's nursery strings alone, especially in the isolated situations of apartments or suburban houses the way they are today. But what we need, you see, are good child care options and a variety of them that parents will control and that can take the place of the grandmothers for a few hours a day, because the grandmothers may not be living in the neighborhood. The grandmothers may be working themselves, you know. They may not be available, you know, for all that much babysitting. Also, what we need are real options in terms of flex time. Flex time is the setup that is being adopted by more and more companies, where there's a certain core amount of time in the middle of the day where everybody's at the office or at the plant, but the time of leaving, the time of coming to work, the lunch hour, or working like maybe 4 days longer hours and then 3 off or whatever. Those things are individually negotiated. And when you have flex time, then it is possible for parents to work out, you know, more easily a sharing, or there are possibilities of going to reduced hours or job sharing, you know, when children are little. I even would like to see the possibility of not only maternity and maternity leave, but maternity and paternity sabbaticals. If I would like women to have the choice if they want to, or men to stay home more nearly full time when children are little, but they don't have that choice today. Don't you see? They don't have that choice today because inflation makes it necessary for the 2 paychecks usually. And there isn't, if you really were going to have that as a really good choice, then you'd have to have some things we don't have now, like some kind of tax credits, some kind of provisions like a parent bill of rights that would enable the parent that did that to get the reschooling necessary to catch up, you know, that would ensure some right to get back to a job the way we did with the GIs during the war. But those things are possible to do, and they do not mean letting the kid be brought up and say, yes, there's stress, there's anxiety to when you work it out, especially if you don't have a good support system. But it's better to face the problems and try to do something about them to reduce the stress, because you're not going to be able to reduce, I think, so easily the economic necessity, you know, or the price that you'd have to pay if women tried to go home again, when they can anyway. They can.
There was an article a few weeks back in the Times about women in depression, and in each
About what?
Women in depression. There was in the 20s a woman. The depression was she's leaving her home, she's getting on her own, and feelings of failure. In the 30s, it was another characteristic. Maybe her life changed. She's maybe from 29 to 30, and the 40s. They all had their different characteristics of depression in each decade. And you kept on mentioning the superwoman, that kind of thing that's happening. And I think it's very well aligned with that article. And it is a bind now because it seems like you almost have to overcompensate. Are there any ideas?
Well, the reason I cited the Midtown Manhattan study and the other study was that with all these problems, and I'm not underestimating the problems, but with all the new problems, and there are new problems, we haven't finished this job, you see, that it's still better being a woman today than it was before. But there are new problems, and there are more pressures that you face as a young woman today, as well as more opportunities that go along with opportunities. And one of the reasons for the more pressures is that we haven't worked out yet some of these support patterns. And this superwoman thing is not so hot. You know, I mean, it's like women are, as you say, overcoming. I would say the word reacting to. You know, we're brought up to be good girls. Get all A's, you know? Okay. So, you know, you're going to be a perfect mother, you know, and then you're going to be a perfect, you know, you have to do it perfectly in the office, too. So women are sort of swallowing hook, line, and sinker. I can't stand these courses, Dress for Success, you know, the kind of 88 ways for you to go ahead in the executive suite, which I'm afraid some women are taking so literally when the men already know that this is an obsolete pattern that they shouldn't be following. So it's going to take a little time to sort this out, but we do need to face. It's not a big deal. I don't think the next step is even going to involve a lot of marching in the streets unless we really have a repressive regime. But that we have innovations, that we work out the child care thing. If we think in terms of child care programs as if it's, well, we're going to have the children brought up the state, forget it. But that we do have to work out a practical a set of options with some combination of public and private financing and ability to pay, and maybe using the schools in the neighborhoods that are not needed any longer with all of that space without the baby boom, and make it possible to have more flexible time arrangements, not only flex time and job sharing, but make it possible in that long lifespan to take leaves early or late, and take a few years off to have children. Economically today it's not possible, but I can see Isaac Asimov, a very brilliant science fiction writer who's a friend of mine, says that he can see in the very near future when it is going to be really understood that that a child is a national treasure, because they're going to become so rare. Anyway, one more question, and I think we've had enough, right?
Well, I like you were disturbed by the right-wing movement that's happening in this country. I'm also disturbed by the number of women that have supported the Republican platform and supporting Monica. Now, I would like to know from your view suggestions, strategies to get in there and to turn these women around.
Well, I tell you what, I think we have to, really, quite seriously, I am very scared about this election. And I really think, I've been critical of Carter. I don't think he's perfect, but I think it is, there is such the choice is very clear here. You've got, as a woman, as an American, as a Jew, I don't care what,
Thanks for listening. For more information on the 92nd Street Y, New York, and all of our programs, please visit us at 92ny.org.